Imagine standing at the edge of a rocky cliff, your heart pounding as the soil shifts beneath your feet, and for the first time, you lay eyes on a skull that doesn't belong to you or to any human you've ever known. This isn't a Hollywood set or the plot of a sci-fi thriller. It's real life in 2025, where brand new Neanderthal remains have been unearthed, challenging everything we thought we knew about our closest cousins. What if these ancient beings were far more sophisticated? What if their story is intertwined with ours in ways that rewrite the very definition of what it means to be human? It started like any other dig. A team of archaeologists, exhausted and sunburnt, were brushing away the dirt in a remote European cave system that had already given up some minor prehistoric clues in the past stone tools. Burnt bones, nothing particularly headline-worthy. But then a fragment emerged. Just a shard of bone at first, the kind that could belong to any large animal. But the shape felt ... familiar. Too familiar. What followed was a chain reaction that would send shockwaves through the scientific world. Within days, the team uncovered a partial skeleton. Then two. Then, buried deeper still, the unmistakable structure of a skull. But this wasn't just any skull. It belonged to a Neanderthal, and not one like the others we've found before. This one was unusually well preserved, almost pristine. Even more surprising, it appeared to have been deliberately placed, almost ritualistically, alongside charred wood, pigments, and sharpened tools. This site wasn't a graveyard. It was something far more complex: a ceremonial chamber, a sacred space. Suddenly, every assumption we held about Neanderthal intelligence began to crumble. For decades, the dominant image of Neanderthals was crude, animalistic, and slow. They were the primitive side branch of the human tree, too dim-witted to survive in a world that demanded innovation. But the latest findings: bone tools shaped with stunning precision, evidence of symbolic behavior, even cave markings resembling early art hint at a different story entirely. This wasn't the work of mindless brutes. These were intentional acts. Cultural acts, human acts. The real breakthrough came when the remains were flown to a state-of-the-art genetics lab for analysis. Within weeks, scientists extracted intact DNA strands that were far more complete than anything we had previously recovered. Using high-resolution genome sequencing, they began comparing the DNA of this Neanderthal to both ancient and modern humans. What they discovered sent chills down every spine in the room. Not only did we share the usual percentage of Neanderthal DNA, roughly 1 to 2%, as many people today do, but this particular Neanderthal had sequences we had never seen before. Genes associated with speech, cognition, even empathy. Let that sink in. We've long debated whether Neanderthals could speak. Now, for the first time, we have genetic indicators suggesting they likely had the biological capacity for language, not just guttural sounds, but something far more structured. It is like finding out a long-lost relative you thought was mute had been whispering poetry all along. And the more the researchers uncovered, the stranger it got. Chemical analysis of the bone revealed a surprisingly varied diet. Not just red meat from hunts, but roasted plants, wild grains, even trace elements of honey. This wasn't a group surviving on scraps. They were gathering, preparing, and sharing food. They had culinary habits. They had choice. But the most haunting discovery came from the skull. A healed fracture, likely from a hunting injury followed by bone regrowth. It suggested this individual had been severely wounded, but cared for by others long enough to recover. That means community. That means compassion. That means a social structure that didn't leave its injured to die alone. In just a matter of months, everything we thought we knew about Neanderthals, their intelligence, their emotions, their culture began to change. This was no longer a simple tale of Homo sapiens outsmarting a lesser species. This was something more complicated, more intimate, and maybe, just maybe, more uncomfortable. Because if Neanderthals were more like us than we ever imagined, what does that make us? The headlines moved fast. Neanderthals had language, buried with meaning, not so different after all. But while the public was fascinated, the scientific world was divided. Inside conference halls and anthropology forums, experts argued fiercely. Were these just anomalies, rare examples of isolated behavior? Or were we glimpsing a broader pattern we had missed for decades? To understand how revolutionary this discovery is, you have to zoom out. For years, the narrative of human superiority rested on our ability to think symbolically, to plan, to build communities, and most importantly, to remember. But now, scattered across Europe and parts of Asia, new Neanderthal sites are revealing signs of shared memory and symbolic continuity. In other words, they may have had stories. One site in Spain showed concentric rings of broken stalagmites arranged deliberately, deep inside a cave where no natural light reached. Burn marks on the stone suggest fire was used there repeatedly. But why would a species, supposedly too primitive to think abstractly, crawl hundreds of feet underground just to light fires and place rocks in a pattern? Ritual? Art? A form of communication? All of it points towards something we thought belonged only to us. The need to create meaning out of existence. Meanwhile, back at the lab, the sequencing continued. One of the most shocking revelations came from a series of genes related to vocal tract development. Scientists once believed the Neanderthal voice box was too high in the throat to produce complex sounds. But 3D reconstruction of the newly found skull, combined with genetic markers, tells a different story. Their anatomy may have allowed for a range of vocalizations not identical to ours, but expressive enough to carry emotion, intention, maybe even names. Imagine that. A Neanderthal calling out to his child. A mother soothing a wounded son with a string of soft, melodic sounds. A group chanting around a fire in a cave, lit only by flickering flame. This isn't science fiction. This is what the evidence is starting to suggest. And if they had names for each other, did they have names for the stars? The animals? The gods? The tools they left behind also speak volumes. Some were made from bone and antler, polished and shaped with an elegance that suggests pride, not just function. One carved piece, thought to be decorative, showed cross-hatched lines and pigment residues. Was it jewelry? A status symbol? Maybe even a love gift? For the first time, we're forced to accept that Neanderthals weren't just surviving, they were living, feeling, thinking, remembering. And then there's the fire. It's easy to overlook just how important fire was. It gave warmth, cooked food, scared off predators. But fire also gathered people. Around it, stories could be told, injuries treated, plans made. And the remains we're finding show that Neanderthals used fire regularly and strategically. They controlled it, protected it, passed it on. Even more revealing is the evidence of pigment use. Red ochre, charcoal, and other minerals were found not just on cave walls, but on tools, bones, and even on the remains themselves. This wasn't accidental. It suggests body painting, symbolic marking, maybe even tribal identity. Imagine a group of Neanderthals preparing for a hunt, marking their faces in unison, bonded not just by blood, but by belief. We used to believe Neanderthals disappeared because we were stronger or smarter. But what if the truth is murkier? What if we didn't replace them, but absorbed them? If these discoveries tell us anything, it's that the line between us and them is far blurrier than we ever wanted to admit. Maybe we didn't beat them. Maybe we joined them. Because in that deep cave, under layers of earth untouched for over 40,000 years, the voice of a Neanderthal is starting to rise again, not in grunts, but in stories waiting to be heard. As the final scans of the skull and bones came through, something unexpected emerged. Tiny grooves on the back of the hand bones and minute wear patterns on the fingertips hinted at something entirely new: fine motor skills. not just for crafting tools or scraping hides, but potentially for intricate handwork. One theory: Neanderthals may have created delicate objects, textiles, woven fibers, or even musical instruments that simply didn't survive the millennia. After all, the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Soft materials rot, wood decays, but the marks left on bone? They whisper. Now imagine this. A family of Neanderthals sitting in the twilight of their shelter. The fire crackles softly. One is grinding pigment for decoration, another mending a tool with practiced hands. The children imitate their elders, learning not just survival, but tradition. In this moment, what truly separates them from us? Is it the shape of their skulls, or is it the stories we've told about them? The research team, overwhelmed by the volume of new data, brought in cognitive scientists to consult. Could a brain slightly different in shape still think like ours? Could it feel what we feel? Early models suggested Neanderthal brains were even larger, on average, than Homo sapiens. Different doesn't mean deficient. It just means different wiring. Some areas involved in vision and movement may have been more developed. Others related to language and emotion showed surprising complexity. These weren't brute instincts. These were conscious decisions, strategic thoughts, emotional bonds. The implications are staggering. If Neanderthals had language, symbolic thinking, community care, possibly even music and art, then the idea of them as lesser vanishes. We've been looking at them through the wrong lens, filtering their story through a narrative of conquest and replacement. But maybe we should have been looking at them as another kind of human. Not a failed experiment, not a stepping stone, but a sibling we barely knew. In light of these findings, museums are already beginning to update their exhibits. The hunched, club-dragging caricatures are being replaced with reconstructions that show upright posture, advanced tools, and even clothing. In schools, anthropology textbooks are being revised. One university scrapped an entire chapter on Neanderthal inferiority and renamed it Parallel Intelligence. Because this isn't just about archaeology anymore, it's about identity. If Neanderthals were emotional, expressive, and capable of love and grief, then the roots of those feelings stretch deeper than we ever imagined. Maybe humanity wasn't born 100,000 years ago in a single spark. Maybe it was a slow-burning fire, lit in different places, in different minds, ours and theirs, across a shared and ancient world. And maybe, just maybe, that ancient world is still echoing inside us, in our instincts, in our art, in the dreams we can't quite explain. The dust hadn't even settled on the excavation site when the deeper questions began rolling in. If Neanderthals had language and culture, what else have we misunderstood? The conversation quickly shifted from dusty caves to philosophy departments, genetics labs, and even ethics committees. Because this isn't just a scientific revelation. It is a redefinition of what it means to be us. Let's start with the timeline. For decades, we believed that Homo sapiens outcompeted Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago, pushing them to extinction with better tools, stronger communities, and smarter thinking. But the new findings challenge that narrative entirely. DNA extracted from both ancient Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens shows multiple points of interbreeding, not one-off encounters, but recurring, long-term gene flow across thousands of years. In other words, we didn't just encounter them. We lived with them, loved them, built families together. This changes everything, because if they weren't just them, they were partly us. Many people walking the earth today carry Neanderthal DNA not in small, isolated pockets, but globally. Some of those genes influence your skin tone, your immune response, your sleep cycle, even how you process pain. The shadow of Neanderthals is stitched into your biology. You carry them in every heartbeat, every breath, every reflex you never learned. But it goes further. Scientists analyzing the genome data found sequences that correlate with neurological development areas that affect learning, memory, and yes, emotion. It's entirely possible that some of our emotional depth, our ability to feel love, fear, all wasn't born with us, but inherited. In a way, we are not the sole authors of the human condition. We're co-authors. Now that idea makes some people uncomfortable because it pokes holes in the myth of Homo sapiens as the triumphant, chosen species. If Neanderthals were capable of art, speech, compassion, if they had names for the stars or songs for the dead, then we didn't win evolution. We shared it, and maybe we lost something too. Some abilities, some knowledge, some ancient ways of seeing the world might have vanished with them. And so, the experts are forced to reconsider old questions with new eyes. What was intelligence in the Ice Age? Was it measured in fire-starting techniques, or the way you cradled your injured friend? Was survival about dominance or about connection? This is the core of what these discoveries ask us to confront. That evolution isn't just a ladder. It's a web, twisting, intersecting, coiling through time in ways we still barely understand. And the more we look at our Neanderthal relatives, the more we realize they were walking right beside us, not behind us. In the weeks following the discovery, something remarkable started to happen. Not just in labs or academic circles, but in people's imaginations. Artists began sketching new portraits of Neanderthals, not as grunting cavemen with blank eyes, but as soulful beings with laughter lines, with mothers, with rituals. Writers, filmmakers, even school children began asking deeper questions. If they were like us, what were their dreams? The ripple effect of this revelation stretched into unexpected places. A neuroscience team began comparing Neanderthal brain reconstructions with modern MRI scans, curious about the emotional circuitry. What they found were overlapping structures involved in empathy, decision-making, and social bonding. Sure, the wiring may have been different in spots, but the emotional blueprint? Strikingly familiar. One researcher described it best. They probably didn't think like us, but they definitely felt with us. Think about that. It means when a Neanderthal mother lost her child, she didn't just walk away. She mourned. When a sibling was injured, they weren't abandoned. They were cared for. When the fire ran low, someone stayed awake through the night to keep it alive. These weren't signs of strategy. They were signs of connection. That brings us to the question historians have long dodged. Why did they vanish? For decades, the default answer was competition. We outsmarted them, outnumbered them, outlasted them. But with this new evidence, that answer feels too neat, too clean. Maybe their disappearance wasn't a battle lost. It was a slow blending, a quiet merging into us. A soft extinction, not of bloodlines, but of names. Some theories even suggest climate played a role, a brutal period of environmental upheaval that made survival nearly impossible in their traditional ranges. Others propose disease introduced by Homo sapiens may have contributed. But there's a haunting alternative that's now gaining traction. Assimilation. They didn't disappear. They became us. The line between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens wasn't a wall. It was a doorway. If that's true, then their culture, their voices, their worldviews didn't die. They transformed. They carried on in lullabies, whispered in caves, in hunting strategies passed through generations, in instincts we don't even remember learning. It forces us to reconsider who we really are. We've spent centuries defining humanity by drawing lines between civilized and savage, between modern and primitive. But these discoveries erase those lines. They remind us that being human wasn't about crushing the others. It was about connecting with them. And maybe, in this age of division and noise, that's the most important thing Neanderthals still have to teach us. In the final stages of this study, one last surprise surfaced, something so intimate, so strangely familiar, that it caught even the most seasoned researchers off guard. Etched into a piece of soft stone near the burial site was a series of repeating marks, not scratches from tools or claws, but what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. Even spacing, rhythm. Some believe it may have been an early form of notation communication, not spoken, but recorded. No, we can't say for sure what those markings meant. Maybe they tracked the lunar cycle. Maybe they told a story. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something more emotional, a way to remember someone who had passed, to leave behind a trace of a life, a memory carved in stone. Whatever the meaning, it's clear that whoever made it had one intention: to be remembered. And that's when it hits you. The urge to be remembered, to mark our place in the world, isn't a modern instinct. It's ancient, deep. It runs through every species of human that ever lived. Long before books, before alphabets, before history, there were marks in the dark, left by hands not so different from ours. As this wave of evidence reshapes our understanding of the Neanderthals, it also forces us to reflect on how we see ourselves. If intelligence isn't just measured by technology, but by empathy, if culture isn't only what we build, but what we pass down, then we have to admit, we were never alone in our greatness. We shared it. And so the question becomes, what else are we wrong about? How many other forgotten branches of humanity left behind whispers we haven't yet learned how to hear? The Denisovans, the hobbits of Flores Island, the countless unnamed ancestors whose stories are buried under ice, sand, and time. Maybe we are not the final form of human evolution. Maybe we're just another chapter built from pieces of those who came before. The discoveries continue. Every excavation now holds new weight. Every fossil a possible key to unlocking a truth far older and more beautiful than we ever imagined. That humanity is not a single flame, but a fire carried and shared through countless hands. And Neanderthals? They were never them. They were always US. So what does this all mean for science, for history, and for you? It means the story of humanity is not as clean, not as simple, and definitely not as separate as we once believed. It's messy, beautiful, and deeply intertwined. We didn't emerge alone. We were shaped by connection, by coexistence, by love and loss passed through generations of forgotten faces. The Neanderthals were never just primitive side characters in our evolutionary tale. They were artists, caretakers, possibly even poets. And their legacy lives on in our bones, our minds, and maybe even in the way we feel things we can't explain. So the next time you look up at the stars or feel something ancient stir in your gut, maybe that's them, still whispering. If this changed the way you think about human history, even just a little, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because this story, it's far from over. We've only just started uncovering the forgotten world that shaped us all. And if you found yourself moved or curious at any point, drop a comment below. What surprised you the most? What questions are you left with? Let's explore it together. We're not just learning about Neanderthals. We're learning about ourselves.